One of the really important developments that's emerged in recent years is called the food, energy, water nexus. That's a fancy way of saying that the way we grow our food, use energy, and consume water is unsustainable. I'm very encouraged by the level of collaboration that's beginning to accelerate across business, government, NGOs, and universities to develop those applications, to develop those solutions, so that we promise not only ourselves but our future generations a better way of life and enable other people who are currently impoverished to join the middle class and have a sustainable lifestyle.
Energy is one of the crucial challenges for humanity. There are, let's say, 4 problems associated with energy. One is the lack of access, meaning that 2.7 billion people have to cook with traditional fuels, leading to air pollution indoor. Another problem is that people don't have access to electricity. The third problem is the security of energy supply and use. Then additional problem is the regional air pollution. And finally, also climate is energy related. Now, if we were to solve all of those problems together, our analysis indicates that the investment costs for the whole world per year would be 40% lower than if we continue trying to resolve those problems separately, as is the practice today in most of the countries around the world.
Changing agriculture requires a broad coalition of people who are interested in feeding the world in a sustainable way. If we look at the challenges ahead of us, they are really, really great. Agriculture has to contribute to the implementation of the SDGs, feeding the world, eradication of poverty, but also managing natural resources in a very different way. Agriculture in Africa is very different than agriculture in the Corn Belt of the United States. You have very small farmers, up to 2 or 3 acres only. 80% of the food in some parts of the world is produced by small-scale farmers. These farmers are the backbone of agriculture and the backbone of the economy. And investing in these small-scale farmers would bring the best benefits for the whole society. And therefore, supporting development of small-scale farmers and achieving the Sustainable Development Goals have to go hand in hand. About 2/3 of all people being hungry are currently living in rural areas in the developing countries. That means that many of the small-scale farmers are hungry. That's a real scandal that the people who are producing our food are hungry, and therefore we have to find ways to increase and to improve production in developing countries. If you look at the population growth being forecasted for Africa, you will see that Africa's population, currently around 1.3 billion people, will increase by 2.5 billion people at the end of this century. And therefore it's clear these people have to produce their own food, and we need decent jobs in agriculture and in the food systems in this country. It doesn't make sense to produce food in industrialized countries and ship it to developing countries, because we would only destroy the infrastructure there. And therefore, agriculture plays a key role in growth and sustainability in developing countries. It's one of the most important areas where we can create new jobs, decent jobs for a growing population. One of the most pressing issues is to preserve genetic diversity. That means we have to look at all the different seeds being available in the world, because we will need these different seeds for adaptation to climate change. And here we are really entering a vicious circle. Climate change and industrial agriculture are narrowing down the genetic diversity of our seeds, but tomorrow we will need this genetic diversity for adaptation to climate change. And therefore, maintaining, conserving and sustainable use of traditional seeds is an investment also.
You think of Africa as a disease-plagued region, and a lot of the population in Africa is increasingly suffering from diabetes because they are eating crops that our large corporations are suggesting that are grown for food sources. And that is not a balanced diet, and it's not the native foods of those regions either. So we have the opportunity with small-scale agriculture to be able to actually more adequately and appropriately meet their nutritional needs and dietary needs and improve their health vastly. And that has application in this country as well as abroad.
climate change has become such a serious problem. It requires actions from all of us, not just our leaders, to slow down global warming. How do we slow it down? We have to bend the curve of steeply rising pollution, steeply rising temperatures, and it requires change in behavior, change in our attitude towards nature and each other, so that we bring down our consumption, switch to renewables. Individual actions are going to be extremely critical in our fight against this defining problem of our age, which is climate change. We all know Pope Francis' encyclical, which was released in June of 2015, had a global impact on our thinking about climate change. But then it raised a question. Climate change is a scientific issue. What is the role Pope Francis has in the scientific problem? I can say with some personal knowledge and expertise, Pope Francis has an Academy of Sciences called Pontifical Academy of Sciences. It has 80 scientists, the best in the world, and about 25 of them are Nobel laureates. And as a member of this distinguished Academy of Science, I can say that encyclical, everything it's said about climate change is based on the best possible scientific advice of today. As a climate scientist working on this problem for 45 years, I have reviewed every sentence and every page of what the encyclical says on climate change, and I can say with absolute confidence it's based on the best scientific evidence we have on climate change. It links the cry of the environment with cry of the poor, and that is based on some profound scientific data. About 60% of the emissions of the warming pollutants is coming from just the top 1 billion people in the world. The worst consequences of that is going to be experienced by the poorest 3 billion who had very little to do with that pollution. And I have personally advised Pope Francis on this ethical, moral issue of climate change. And it's reflected right through the encyclical about protecting the vulnerable. And we know the United Nations heard Pope Francis. For example, the Paris Climate Agreement has promised $100 billion of climate financing, some of which is going to be used to protect the vulnerable. So one can ask, what's the role of religions in our fight against climate change? We scientists are predicting in about 10 to 20 years, there is going to be even more profound changes. Profound changes are already happening in terms of weather and extreme weather, but it's going to get worse and a lot severe. We need massive public support to take drastic actions in reducing our consumption, in switching to more smart fuels. And I personally feel the only way we are going to get that massive public support is when climate change and the fact that it's due to human activities and the fact that it's going to hurt billions of vulnerable people have to be talked about and taught. Every church, every temple, every synagogue, and every mosque. So I'm hoping that Pope Francis will take leadership, as he has, and commission Interfaith Summit so that the message can grow across all religions to everyone on this planet Earth.
For 30 years, we've been teaching farmers a new way to farm, where we use the biology of the soil in complement to the chemistry and the tillage and other things that they use to be able to produce higher yields at lower costs and to actually make more money. You get a lot of environmental benefits at the same time, lower carbon footprint, fewer nutrients into the water, and you get additional nutrition out of the crops. But the core element here is to use soil biology in concert with the chemistry of the soil to deliver more nutrients to the plant, to get the plants to grow better, grow healthier, and have higher yield. We have to incentivize farmers to use their nutrients more wisely. It only costs a farmer 40 cents a pound to add a pound of nitrogen to a field. But it costs a city $25 to $100 to remove a pound of nitrogen from the sewer water or the drinking water. That price differential is too great. We have to find a way to bring those two values back together, to be able to come to accommodation between those two value propositions so both can win.
So it's a common perception that chemical-based agriculture is the only thing that could feed the world, and organic or biologically grown food would not have sufficient yield to do that. When you look at the scientific literature, it doesn't really support that. And a good example is Emmanuel Munday, Dr. Emmanuel Munday, who published under peer review, compared industrial-type corn to an old-fashioned African open-pollinated variety, and under the same biological type systems, they attain statistically similar yields. Interestingly, when he compared the two corns growing under the biologically intensive system to the conventional corn grown with synthetic inputs, they were twice the yield. The biological was twice the yield of the conventional.
No, I'm sorry. Many people think of EPA as a regulatory agency. It may surprise you to find out that here at EPA, we have many voluntary programs to work with stakeholders, including consumers, to address environmental problems, particularly those environmental problems that have a social and economic impact. Food waste is one of those areas. We throw away 35 million tons of food annually. That food ends up in our landfills. We need to reduce that. So the United States set a goal to reduce food waste by half by 2030. We have a food recovery challenge where we work with colleges and universities and grocers and faith-based organizations and other non-governmental organizations to help them come up with ways to reduce the amount of wasted food they have, and then to help them find ways to help others by donating that food. The average American family throws away $1,500 in food waste every year. We also have a tool called Food Too Good to Waste that is for consumers. It helps you with meal planning, grocery shopping, and coming up with ways and strategies so that we can maximize the money that we spend on our food, and we can keep that $1,500 for something we want to spend it on.